There is a particular kind of child the adults in the room always speak about with a quiet, satisfied pride. They say it almost like a gift they gave themselves. She was never any trouble. He just knew how to handle things. She figured it out on her own. He never really needed much. And the child grows, and the child carries that sentence forward like a lantern through decades of living, not knowing that what felt like a compliment was actually a soft, careful erasure. Not knowing that never causing problems was not a personality trait. It was a posture, a learned stillness, a way of making themselves small enough to fit inside the available love. This is an essay about that child, about what it cost them, about what it still costs them, quietly, invisibly, in the architecture of their adult days. Because somewhere, right now, there is a grown person who cannot ask for help without a rehearsed speech. Someone who lies awake at night cataloguing every mistake from a conversation 6 hours ago. Someone who gives and gives and gives inside their relationships until they are hollow, and then feels guilty for feeling hollow. Someone who doesn't know why intimacy feels simultaneously like the thing they want most and the thing that frightens them most deeply. That person was once a child who learned, through 1,000 small and unremarkable moments, that the safest thing they could do was disappear. This is where it began. The first quiet ash on learning to be easy. Picture a kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday evening. One parent is tense, their exhaustion visible in the set of their shoulders, in the way they place things down just slightly too hard. The other is absent, either physically or in the way that people can be absent while standing in the same room. And somewhere in that kitchen, a child is reading the room with the precision of a trained meteorologist. They can feel the pressure changing. They know the weather is about to turn, so they become quiet. They set the table without being asked. They do not mention the thing that happened at school. The small cruelty from a classmate, the test result that scared them, the question that kept circling in their chest all day. They shrink the circumference of their emotional presence. They make themselves a smaller interruption, and it works. The storm passes. Nobody yelled. Nobody left. The silence held. This is the moment the learning happens. Not in a single dramatic crisis, but in the accumulated arithmetic of 1,000 Tuesday evenings, just like this one. The child learns that the regulation of the household's emotional atmosphere is, in some wordless way, partially their responsibility. They learn that their needs, when expressed at the wrong time, in the wrong register, too loudly or too often, create a friction that the system cannot comfortably hold. The good child is often the most observant child. They are exquisitely attuned to the emotional states of the adults around them. They can read a tone of voice the way others read a paragraph, extracting subtext, weighing implications, anticipating consequences. This is not a small gift. It is actually a profound form of intelligence. But it is an intelligence that developed in the service of safety, not of self-expression. And so the suppression becomes fluent. The child stops reaching toward adults with their interior weather, their fears, their confusions, their ordinary childhood griefs, because they have learned that this reaching does not reliably bring comfort. It brings complication. It brings a parent who is overwhelmed or impatient, or who redirects the conversation back to their own exhaustion. So the child learns to process alone, to solve alone, to be, as the adults will later say with evident satisfaction, so mature for their age. What nobody says is that maturity, in a child, is sometimes just grief wearing a composed expression. Handvangalalas. Where love went missing on warmth that arrived with conditions. The homes that produce this particular child are not always visibly broken homes. In fact, they are often what the outside world would call successful homes. There may be economic stability. There may be 2 present parents. There may be educational opportunity, structured schedules, high expectations framed as love, ambition framed as care. From the outside, nothing is obviously wrong, and this is one of the loneliest parts, because it makes the child's internal experience almost impossible to name, even to themselves. They look at the material facts of their childhood, and feel something like guilt for the quiet ache they carry. What do I have to complain about? We weren't poor. Nobody hit me. They worked hard. They provided. But love is not only provision. Love, in its developmental sense, is attunement. It is the experience of being seen, not just fed, not just housed, not just praised for performance, but actually witnessed in your interior life. It is having someone turn toward your emotion without immediately trying to fix it, minimize it, or be made uncomfortable by it. It is the felt sense that your inner world matters, not just your outer behavior. What many of these children received instead was conditional warmth. Affection flowed most freely when they performed well, when they got the grades, won the award, behaved impeccably in public, caused no friction with siblings, required no extra accommodation. The warmth contracted, became cooler and more distant when they struggled, failed, expressed difficult emotions, or simply needed more than the household was prepared to offer. This is not about blaming parents. Most parents who raise this kind of child were themselves raised by the same unspoken curriculum. They had their own unmet needs, their own unexamined conditioning. They gave what they could from what they had, which is the exhausting arithmetic of every human generation. But what the child learns inside this conditional warmth is devastating in its simplicity. I am lovable when I am easy. When I am difficult, I am a burden. And so, unconsciously, methodically, they set about engineering themselves into perpetual easiness. They hide the difficult parts. They perform the acceptable parts. They become, over time, a curated self, a version of themselves specifically designed to generate warmth rather than distance. The tragedy is that they become so fluent in this performance that, eventually, they can no longer fully locate themselves underneath it. Hangrulas. How the mind and body protect itself. On the wisdom of learned vigilance. There is something important that must be understood here, something that changes the entire moral texture of this story. The adaptations this child made were not weaknesses. They were not character flaws or early signs of dysfunction. They were, in the truest biological sense, brilliant. The human nervous system is designed, above all else, for survival. And for a child, a creature who is genuinely dependent on adult caregivers for physical and emotional survival, the loss of connection is not merely uncomfortable, it registers at the level of the nervous system as a mortal threat. The body does not distinguish cleanly between social rejection and physical danger. Both activate the same ancient alarm system. So when a child learns that expressing certain emotions reliably reduces warmth or increases tension, the nervous system files this information in its most urgent archive. This is how we stay safe. Suppress the need, monitor the environment, anticipate the mood, move carefully, be useful, be quiet, stay small. Over months and years of repetition, these responses stop being conscious decisions and become automatic. They become the default setting of the nervous system itself. The body learns to brace before conflict even begins. The shoulders carry a low, chronic tension that the person cannot fully explain. There is a scanning quality to how they move through rooms, a baseline alertness, a part of them perpetually on watch. Shame, too, becomes a protective mechanism in this architecture. Shame says, if I can identify what is wrong with me before anyone else does, if I can be smaller and more apologetic and more careful, maybe I can prevent rejection before it arrives. It is an extraordinary act of preemptive protection. The child learns to turn the critical voice inward so that the adults outside never need to. Attachment researchers would describe many of these children as developing insecure attachment, specifically the anxious or avoidant patterns. The anxiously attached child hypermonitors relationships for signs of withdrawal and redoubles their efforts to be pleasing at the first hint of distance. The avoidantly attached child goes the other direction, learning to need nothing, to present a sealed and self-sufficient surface to the world. Both are intelligent, adaptive responses to an environment that could not consistently receive vulnerability with care. Both, in adulthood, cost an enormous amount. Handvarnrulers, the battle no one sees on what survival becomes inside intimacy. The grown version of this child is often very good at life on the surface. They are reliable, they are capable, they are the friend who shows up, the colleague who delivers, the partner who anticipates. They have honed their sensitivity to other people's emotional states to such a fine edge that they can walk into a room and feel the invisible currents before anyone has spoken a word. But inside the closest relationships, inside the places where real intimacy becomes possible, and therefore real danger also becomes possible, something begins to fracture. Or rather, several contradictory things become true at once, and the contradictions are unbearable. They want closeness desperately, and closeness terrifies them. They want to be truly known, and they cannot stop editing themselves for palatability. They want to ask for what they need. And asking feels like the most dangerous act in the world, because asking means revealing need, and revealed need has historically been met with absence or impatience. So they give instead. They give lavishly, preemptively, even resentfully, because giving maintains the connection without requiring the vulnerability of receiving. They become skilled at meeting everyone else's needs, and quietly, unconsciously, they hope that this generosity will teach people how to love them back. It almost never does, in the precise way they need, and the resentment that accumulates is then directed inward, because expressing it outward feels too dangerous. They also tend to carry an exhausting internal monologue of apology. Before they speak, they preemptively measure the weight of their words against the patience of the listener. After they speak, they replay the interaction for evidence of having said something wrong. They apologize for taking up space in their relationships, for having feelings, for having needs, for being, in any moment, slightly difficult. Perfectionism often lives here too, wearing the face of discipline or high standards, but rooted in something far older. The belief that if I can simply eliminate my flaws thoroughly enough, I will finally be safe from abandonment. That if I can be good enough at enough things, I will have earned my place. Hungro Lons. When the pattern becomes visible on seeing the map for the first time, there is a particular moment that many people who carry this history describe. It does not always arrive dramatically. It is not always in a therapist's office, though sometimes it is. Sometimes it comes in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, reading something, hearing something, watching something, and suddenly the architecture of one's own interior life becomes briefly, startlingly visible, not as a wound, not as a diagnosis, but as a pattern, an old, understandable, perfectly logical pattern. The people-pleasing is not a personality flaw. It is the continuation of a strategy that once served a genuine survival function. The difficulty receiving love is not evidence of being broken. It is what happens when the nervous system learned to associate need with rejection and is now simply applying that old lesson to new people who have not earned that suspicion, but who are being held responsible for it anyway. The perfectionism is not ambition. It is armor. Seeing this is different from understanding it intellectually. Understanding it intellectually is what you can do in the first hour. Seeing it, genuinely, viscerally recognizing yourself moving through your life according to rules that were written in a childhood that is no longer happening, is something more seismic. It is disorienting and oddly tender at the same time. Because when you can see the pattern, you can stop blaming yourself for it. You can extend to yourself the same basic interpretive generosity you would offer any child who had learned, from the available evidence, that the safest thing they could do was disappear. You wouldn't call that child flawed. You would call them adaptive. You would understand that they did the most intelligent thing they could with the information and the resources they had. That child is still in there, still running old calculations inside a world that has changed enormously around them, and they do not need to be fixed. They need, for perhaps the first time, to be received. Han Fungrolars, learning a different tenderness, on the long, slow work of coming home to yourself healing, for this particular history, is not a dramatic rupture with the past. It is not a single breakthrough or a moment of catharsis that reorganizes everything. It is, instead, something more like a long and patient archaeology, a gradual excavation of the self that was buried beneath the performance of being easy, being good, being no trouble at all. It begins often with the body, because the nervous system stores what the mind could not process. Healing frequently means learning to work with the physical residue of old vigilance, the chronic tension in the chest, the held breath before difficult conversations, the way the stomach contracts when someone seems even slightly displeased. Somatic practices, slow movement, breath work, gentle attention to what is actually happening in the body right now are not supplementary to this healing. They are often the primary site of it, because you cannot think your way out of a pattern that lives below thought. You have to feel your way through it, slowly, with enormous patience. Grief is part of this too, and it is the part that many people resist most fiercely. Because to grieve the childhood that did not happen, the version in which your needs were welcomed, in which your emotions were met with curiosity rather than overwhelm, in which someone turned toward you consistently enough that you learned to trust the act of turning toward others, is to fully acknowledge what was lost. And that acknowledgement is painful in a clean and necessary way. It is the kind of pain that moves through you rather than living in you indefinitely. You do not grieve in order to stay sad. You grieve in order to stop carrying the grief unconsciously. You grieve so that it can become the past, rather than continuing to masquerade as your present. Learning to receive is also part of this work. Allowing someone to do something for you without immediately needing to reciprocate or justify or diminish the gesture. Sitting with the discomfort of being cared for, because it will feel uncomfortable at first. The nervous system will flag it as strange, as precarious, as something that might be taken away, and staying with it anyway, letting it become gradually more familiar. Boundaries, in this context, are not a self-protective wall. They are the thing that makes real intimacy possible, because you cannot truly connect with another person while you are simultaneously editing yourself for their comfort. The self that arrives after learning to set boundaries is more honest, more present, more genuinely available than the agreeable surface was ever capable of being. And slowly, across weeks and months, and sometimes years of small moments, something shifts. You begin to notice that your needs are not, in fact, as catastrophic or as burdensome as the original evidence suggested. That people who love you are actually interested in knowing you, the real, unedited, sometimes difficult, sometimes uncertain, sometimes needy version of you, that your presence does not require justification, that your feelings do not require apology. You begin to learn what it feels like to belong to yourself, to move through your days with your own inner compass, rather than the perpetual outward scanning of a child waiting for weather. To say what you actually mean and find that the sky does not fall. To ask for what you need and discover that the asking itself does not diminish you, that it is in fact the most honest thing you have ever done. To the child in you who was so good, so quiet, so willing to disappear for the sake of peace. You are seen. What you did was extraordinary, and you do not have to do it anymore. You are allowed to take up room. You are allowed to be, at last, a little bit of trouble. Han Hanrowanlas. If any part of this reflection found you somewhere that matters, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and take good care of yourself today. Not perfectly, just gently.